What advice then would you give to somebody that wanted to be a sort of indie promoter?
Become an agent. I'm serious. That is my advice I give everyone. Like, if I was starting again, I would not have become a promoter. I'd have been an agent from the get-go or a manager.
Could you quickly explain then the difference between the two?
So I call a promoter a professional gambler. So you're bidding for shows, you're putting up as much money as you're comfortable putting up, and you're on risk. So if the show doesn't sell, you lose money. If you're an agent, you're more closely associated to the band. You're actually working for them and with their management team and their wider team, and you're taking a commission. So it doesn't matter if the show loses money, as long as the band's getting a fee, you're taking a percentage of that, usually 10%. Whereas promoters are working increasingly for less and less percentage now. The tradition is 20% go of the show profit after all the costs goes to the promoter and 80% to the artist. But as bands get bigger, as competition gets bigger for it, increasingly, like if you're doing a stadium tour now, you're probably on 5% as a promoter, and you're probably happy with 5% of the revenue that comes from a Taylor Swift show or an Ed Sheeran show. But that's your only way to keep hold of it, because someone else will do it for that small percentage otherwise. But yeah, be an agent, not a promoter.
I love that as a piece of advice.
I've realised it more and more since I've moved into the management side, and I still do promote. I still freelance for Kili. I've got artists I've worked with for years that I don't want to give up, so I've just done a deal with Stuart to still do that on a freelance basis. But I have realised since becoming a manager that, and it sounds horrible to say, how the artists especially don't really value promoters, and I don't mean that in a nasty way. They just don't think about it. They've got their agent, they've got their manager, and I used to always feel like a pressure to be at every show and go into the dressing room with a bottle of champagne at the end and say well done, or get plaques for them and things. But in reality, like when you see it from the artist side, they actually get pissed off when someone's just traipsing in their dressing room and they don't really know at the end, and they're trying to just chill out after pouring their heart and soul out on stage for an hour and a half. It's quite mad, and that's something I now have to manage, because I'm looking at kind of, I want the promoters to feel included and all the rest of it, but I also don't want my artists kind of knackered after they've played a gig.
And there's a random.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What was the decision then to move from Live Nation to Kili?
So Stuart had left. I felt at the time that I didn't really know exactly what was going on. I was very much the new kid at Live Nation at the time, and I quickly realised, going from the Barfly, where, not to sound big-headed, I felt like I was quite important there with the work I was doing, to being kind of overlooked at Live Nation when everyone's doing bigger tours than I was, and pop punk and emo wasn't the cool thing compared to the big pop tours and stuff. So
what sort of venue size were you doing when you were at Live Nation?
It varied. It went from kind of first ever shows with bands in 150, 200 cap rooms just to get in early with the London show, up to, I think at that point I was kind of doing 1,000 to 1,500s in some cases. My first one that kind of got anywhere when I was at Live Nation was Elliott Minor. I don't know if you remember them. They're doing a comeback at the moment. So we got them into the Astoria, and that was like my first, actually ended up being my only Astoria gig because it closed down shortly after. But that was my first kind of 2,000 cap kind of big band that started to get in the charts and do well. So, but I moved to Kili because Stuart gave me an opportunity to go. He said to me, come over, and I'm starting this festival. I think it was called Hemispheres at the time rather than Sonosphere, as it went on to become. And I think there was a team of like 5 people in the office at that point, and it was owned by AEG. So I went over, I took with me You Me at 6 and Elliott Minor and Kids in Glass Houses and various other bands that I was promoting at the time, and just felt more kind of independent and more kind of the spirit of the pop punk scene of what I was used to. So I do often wonder back, if I'd stayed at Live Nation, what my career path would have been. I'm sure I probably would have ended up working with a lot bigger artists and potentially still there and doing big arena tours and things. But even then, once I moved to Kili, my first big one with Kili was I got in really early on Katy Perry and ended up doing kind of Birmingham NIA with her and a couple of arenas. That first couple of tours with Katy was split between Kili, Live Nation and SJM. And then as it got bigger, it became more of a worldwide deal, and eventually I was kind of pushed out of it. But yeah, that was a nice career highlight, doing my first ever arena shows with Katy Perry. And I found her through, I need to credit my wife because she was the one actually who tipped me off on her in the first place. But then I went over to Vans Warped Tour in America and met with her manager and her and kind of hustled for it to make sure we got some shows on it.
That's fucking cool, man.
Yeah.
Didn't expect you to say Katy Perry. Yeah, that's sick. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt the podcast, but if you're enjoying it, please give us a rate and a review on Spotify or Apple. If you're watching us on YouTube, please give us a subscribe. It really, really helps the channel knowing that we've got the subscribers and people are listening and rating and reviewing it. It'll help us keep booking more guests and doing more podcasts. So do us that one little favor and we'll be able to keep booking more people and keep doing more episodes. Back to it. What were the sort of biggest challenges then with Kili? Because I didn't realize that it was that small and new at that point. Because I remember sort of seeing Kili shows and seeing Sonisphere and stuff like that. And it was when UPRAWR was starting to do like semi-well. And we hadn't heard of Kili. And the second that we saw it was doing all that stuff, we were like, fuck, we're idiots. How do we not know this company? We should have known who these were. Like, we're so behind.
Yeah. I mean, it works that way with the agents as well. Like, they all knew who we were. Like, they all knew the promoters there from their previous roles. But Stuart had managed to take with him Metallica and Red Hot Chili Peppers and all these big acts that he'd always done over the years, because he's been doing it since, I was reminding him the year I was born, so he's been doing it since 1984. So he had those relationships and took those artists with him. But when we had Sonisphere, and then when we launched Warped Tour in Europe and partnered with Kevin Lyman on that really put us on the map, especially in the rock side of things, because it meant me and Alan Day had the tool basically to, if people kind of were bringing bands to us without us even saying the kind of, oh, if you want your band on our festival, we need to be a promoter. A lot of the time we weren't even saying that, they were just coming to us. And that was the time where I was picking up lots and lots of bands like State Champs and Citizen and various others in that scene. But it goes away pretty quickly. So once Warped Tour stopped and once Sonisphere stopped, and that was challenges in itself as well. Then suddenly all the agents are like, oh, okay, we need festivals for our bands. Let's go back to Live Nation now and work with Download or Reading and Leeds Festival. And Ben Ray had started Slam Dunk as well over that time, and was giving them an independent option for festivals as well. I mean, Sonisphere was brutal when it went for us, because we loved that festival, and it felt like it had a good reputation and a good vibe to it. But effectively, one of the biggest challenges facing the smaller national promoters is the financial side of it. So if a Live Nation or one of the bigger ones wants to get you out the market, the thing they can do is get their checkbook out and pay the headliners more than you can pay them. And Download, it's like 80,000 plus capacity, whereas Sonisphere we were basing around 50,000, and that was the kind of comfortable risk exposure level that we could run at, and also what tickets we could sell. Like even with Metallica and I Maiden, you were looking around that kind of 50,000 mark for a new festival that was still building its name. And then Warped Tour effectively ran its course. We did 3 years of it. We had a year off. We came back for one more year, or maybe it was 3 in total. I can't remember now. But Vans at the time kind of shifted its focus on where they wanted to spend their sponsorship money. And with that being a smaller indoor festival at Ali Pali, the profit on it was the sponsorship. So the ticket sales covered what I was paying the bands and the cost of the gig. And to justify doing it from a business point of view for Kili, the sponsorship money from Monster and Vans was what was going. But Vans were opening their House of Vans and pummeling their money into that. I think they musically at that point, they were starting to do a bit more with hip hop and things as well. So once that sponsorship money had gone, me and Kevin Lyman had to have a chat about it, and it just didn't make sense for either of us at that point. And I guess Warped Tour then was starting to wind down a little bit in the US at that point as well. Probably, I don't know the ins and outs of that side of it, but probably similar conversations from his end. So.
Why did you then decide to leave being a promoter?
I took quite a few knocks. So once Warped Tour and Sonisphere had kind of run its course, it became a lot harder to kind of battle for bands, either to pick up the new stuff or actually hold on to the ones I was doing. So I had 3 years in a row where I lost big acts to Live Nation, and that was brutal. So Yumi at 6, change management, change agent. As part of that, they decided to move it over to Live Nation. That was a band I'd worked with from meeting them in Costa Coffee opposite the old Live Nation office when I was there as 16, 17-year-old kids who were playing their first gigs. I'd put them on I kind of worked with them from there up. I lost them 1 year, I lost Parkway Drive another, and then I lost Neck Deep, and that was the kind of final one, because that was, again, I gave them, it's quite funny when I watched your interview with Leander recently, and he was talking about how he saw them support Me versus Hero at Camden Bar Fight. It was me that put them on that tour, because I was managing Me versus Hero at the time and promoting the tour. So Neck Deep were a band that I'd worked from their first ever gig at that Camden Assembly show that they played with me this year. I was texting Kevin Lyman from Warped Tour saying, you need to check out this band. And a year later, they were playing Warped Tour. And then once they got to Ali Pali level, it was suddenly moved over to Live Nation so they could get their offers for the bigger festivals and things. So that was all happening at a time when I'd fallen into the world of like YouTube. So this is even prior to TikTok and Instagram. So I'd got involved off the back of doing Warped Tour at Ali Pali. I'd had a phone call from a music industry friend who'd moved into the YouTube world and was working with YouTubers at a multi-channel network. So they were signing up YouTube channels to monetize them. I didn't know anything about it at that point. And he called me and said, Mark, you've done Ali Pali with Warped Tour. I think his words were along the lines of these kids who are big on YouTube have booked Ali Pali and sold 7,000 tickets and we're sponsoring it, but they don't know what they're doing. Can you help them out? So I was like, sure. We went and met with them, came up with a deal for us to provide services for them effectively. So manage the venue, manage the security, manage the production side of things. So their event could happen. It was an event called Summer in the City. And it had gone from being a meetup in a park that got shut down by police because too many kids turned up to a ticketed event with 7,000 people. And my eyes were opened up to this world where kids and parents were elbowing each other out the way to try and meet Zoella and Alfie and all the big YouTubers at the time. But there was also a stage, and they had like artists like Dodie performing on it and all these musicians that were big on YouTube at the time. But I was the only music industry person in the room. No one was paying attention to them. And if they were managed at that point, they were generally managed by marketing agencies who weren't thinking anything about the music side of what they were doing. And one of those early ones, as it is played, one of their first gigs, because Patty was a big YouTuber at the time before they got signed to Fearless. So I started promoting tours with YouTubers, both musical and non-musical, brought a new arm to Kili where effectively we were doing shows that weren't in the music space, but we were actually having to produce these shows as well. So coming up with the creative, with the talent and touring screens and couches and all the rest of it to, I guess, what is now the equivalent of like a live podcast tour, which wasn't really a thing back then.